Hey guys, tonight we drift through reeds whispering in the moonlight, past the croaking frogs and slow rolling currents of the Nile. The air hangs heavy with lotus and silt. A woven basket bobs gently against the shore. Inside it, a child sleeps, his head still damp from birth, his future larger than the sun gods who rule the sky.
You won't survive this story. No one really does. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is over there.
Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. He was not born in cold.
His cries were not echoed in scrolls.
No stars aligned above him, none that the priests recorded anyway.
He was only a boy, swaddled in rushes, placed on the water by hands no one ever saw. Some said his mother was a temple servant.
Others whispered she was a royal concubine, cast aside in a palace plot. Whoever she was, she trusted the Nile more than the court. The basket floated for hours, maybe days, carried by currents and crocodile dreams.
Finally, it washed ashore near a small village where the reeds grew thick and wild, and the air buzzed with gnats and gossip. A fisherman's wife found him, blinking up at the sky with the unbothered expression of someone already used to being
watched by gods. She named him Setka, meaning magic of the car, an ambitious name for someone born with nothing but Egypt-loved ambition, especially the kind that could be dressed up in linen and whispered about under breath. Setka grew, with the sun in his bones.
He ran barefoot along the fields, chased ibis, asked him many questions.
By the age of 10, he knew how to read the curves of the riverbank, how to avoid sacred eels, and how to sneak into the temple kitchens for leftover dates. But what made the village priest nervous wasn't his cleverness, it was the dreams. Setka began to speak of things he'd never seen. Cities of light, staircases made of lapis lazuli, great stone lions that roared without mouths. One night, he described the hidden chamber beneath the Falcon Temple, where the high priest had placed a relic so secret no one outside the order even knew it existed, that got him an invitation he could refuse. He was taken into the house of life, the great temple school where scribes were trained and kings were sometimes made.
There, among columns painted with stars and gods with animal heads, Setka began to change. He grew quiet.
He listened more. He learned to draw the sacred signs, first in sand, then in ink. He memorized the names of pharaohs past, not just the
ones carved in stone, but the erased ones too.
The heretics, the exiled, the ones whose tombs were sealed with no fanfare. One day, during a flood season when the water reached unusually high, Setka stood on the roof of the temple and claimed he'd seen Ai weeping.
Ai does not weep, the priest said. Setka only smiled.
Not for you. By 16, Setka was interpreting dreams for merchants and nobles. At 17, he was summoned to the court.
There, beneath the throne canopy decorated with vulture feathers
and gold stars, the queen regarded him like a falcon considering a mouse. You claim to speak to gods? She asked. Setka shrugged. Sometimes they answer. That was enough.
He became the court's dreamkeeper, the reader of shadows.
He wore a collar of Fion's beads and was given a chamber near the granaries. He was no longer a boy of the river. Now he lived among stone and law, surrounded by officials who bowed with stiff necks and always spoke through smiles. But the whispers began again. Some said the queen kept him too close.
Others said the king had no sons. Still others said the
boy had the mark of the sedge and bee, the emblems of Upper and Lower Egypt, hidden somewhere on his skin. None could prove it, but no one dared touch him.
He was protected by something older than politics. Historians still argue whether Setka was truly the son of a concubine, a child of prophecy, or a puppet placed by the priesthood in a long and slow coup.
The records are vague and suspiciously tidy. His name appears more often in temple graffiti than in royal decrees. But one thing is certain. On the first day of Perit, the season of growth, Setka stood before the people wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt, a gift from the southern priests. And not long after, he received the red crown of Lower Egypt, delivered on a litter of sycamore wood. Carried by 20 men who refused to meet his eyes, he fused the crowns into one, the pskent, symbol of unity, symbol of dominance. And he took
a new name, Nebmatai. Lord of Truth is I. That's when the statues began appearing, huge ones, stone faces with his jawline, his almond-shaped eyes, his impossible stillness. The boy from the river was now pharaoh. Not elected, not chosen,
just inevitable. The fisherman's wife, long since passed, was buried in a tomb he ordered carved near the edge of the necropolis.
No fanfare, no announcement, but carved inside was a single line. She placed me on the water.
The
Gods carried me the rest of the way, and somewhere, in a shadowed room beneath the palace floor, a priest whispered. He was never ours to begin with. The double crown was heavy, not just in weight, but in expectation. Nebmat I, once Setko of the river reeds, now sat on a throne carved with winged cobras and lion legs, flanked by lotus torch-bearers and stern-faced scribes.
He could no longer walk the streets. He could no longer sleep without attendants watching his dreams. The boy who used to chase ibises now ruled a kingdom stitched together by ritual, drought, and ambition. The court around him was a performance, choreographed like a temple procession.
Nobles arrived in sequined linen, powdered with crushed turquoise. They bowed so often their necks barely held shape.
Priests hovered like vultures around a carcass, whispering, suggesting, warning. Each claimed to carry the will of a different god.
Horus wanted more tribute.
Thoth demanded changes to the calendar.
Bastet needed a new festival, or else the cats would be
Unhappy,
and through it all, Nebmat I remained quiet,
watching,
listening. At times, his stillness made others nervous.
A few even claimed he didn't sleep at all, that he wandered the palace at night, barefoot and silent, leaving no footprints. One priest tried to test him, presenting a scroll that falsely named a minor noble as the reincarnation of Osiris. Nebmat I read it, looked up, and said, Osiris never wore perfume from the Delta marshes.
You reek of it. The priest vanished by sunset, despite his reputation for mystery. The new pharaoh was not without a heart.
He commissioned public granaries near the villages, restored shrines to neglected gods, and restructured the Corv-E system so laborers got regular meals and rest breaks.
A radical notion at the time.
Historians still argue whether these reforms were born of compassion, strategy, or simply dreams he couldn't shake. But power, once taken, must be proven. And nothing proved Pharaoh's divinity like a monument. Nebmat I summoned his architects and pointed across the desert plateau.
There, he said.
We will build a house for my body. The architects exchanged glances.
No one asked if he meant for after his death.
The implication was obvious.
Eternity didn't wait. What he envisioned was more than a tomb, it was a prophecy in limestone.
A structure so vast it would outlast memory itself, not just for burial, but for transformation. IT began with sketches on papyrus, then full models, in wax and clay. Stones were sourced from Turas' glittering quarries, each slab polished until the sun blinked of it. Laborers were brought in from every corner of the kingdom, peasants, farmers, artisans. Some came willingly, drawn by the promise of bread and gold. Others arrived in shackled lines, their eyes hollow from lust was. Still, Nebmat I insisted.
They be treated well.
Rest days, music in the camps, meat twice a week, not out of mercy, but mathematics. He believed joy carved straighter lines. T. The heart of the design was a stepped structure, massive, angular, rising in tiers like a
stairway for gods.
The man behind it was a genius priest architect named Imhotep.
He spoke rarely, blinked less, and claimed stone whispered back if you asked politely. Imhotep and Nebmat I became an unlikely pair.
One born of river mud, the other from incense and scrolls. They walked the building site together at night, when only jackals and stars watched. The pharaoh spoke of dreams of gods turning to fire, of serpents coiled in golden chambers, of doors that led nowhere. Imhotep only nodded, occasionally drawing symbols in the sand with his staff. Construction was brutal.
Thousands worked under the punishing sun. Hands bled from hauling rope, lungs choked with dust.
But the vision held.
Stone by stone, the pyramid rose. Meanwhile, Nebmat I's court grew tense. The nobles whispered that he favored stone over blood, that he spent more time with masons than ministers.
The high priest of Amun grew especially irritated, noting that the pharaoh had not yet named a royal wife, nor produced an heir without lineage. There is no eternity. The priest reminded him. Nebmat I replied, then build me a staircase tall enough to reach it myself. Quirky side note. A popular rumor among workers was that if you rubbed a particular cornerstone 3 times, your child would be born with royal eyes.
Women began sneaking into the construction site under moonlight, palm wine in hand, whispering.
To stone. Whether it worked is
unverified. As the monument neared completion, something shifted in the pharaoh.
He grew quieter,
but also more intense. He began wearing new regalia, amulets shaped like scarabs, a cloak woven with tiny gold feathers. He claimed they came to him in dreams.
His closest advisors began documenting his visions daily, believing them divine messages. Others weren't so sure. Historians still argue whether this change was spiritual awakening or slow unraveling. Either way, the court followed his lead. The gods demanded obedience, and Nebmat-ai was the gods. Or so the story went. One evening, as the sun bled behind the dunes, the pharaoh climbed the unfinished pyramid alone.
No guards, no entourage.
Just him and the sky. He stood at the top until darkness swallowed him whole. In the morning, they found
a line of footprints leading back down, but none leading up. He never explained it. But after that night, he insisted on one final addition. A narrow chamber deep within the structure, not for his body, but for a box carved from meteoric iron, black, smooth, humming faintly when touched. No one knew where it came from.
Imhotep just called it the heart. The pyramid was completed in the 19th year of his reign. It rose like a thought made solid, brilliant and alien against the blue sky.
People wept at its unveiling. Some fainted.
Even the priests had no words. Nebmat-ai entered it once.
Alone, when he emerged, he simply said, "Now I will live forever." They called it the Pyramid of Breathless Stone.
It shimmered beneath the desert sun like a mirage you could walk into, but never leave. Every block was set with mathematical precision, its angles calculated to match the stars.
Nebmat-ai had built a monument, not just to his death, but to his becoming. No one dared speak of it as a tomb.
That would be too final, and yet, for all its perfection, something felt off. The labor camps, once alive with song and story, grew quiet. Workers whispered of strange sounds coming from within the inner corridors.
Not the creaking of settling, stone but humming, low and steady, like the vibration of a plucked string.
A few said they saw light flicker from sealed rooms. Others claimed that birds refused to land on the summit. Nebmat-ai dismissed it all. Stone remembers the stars, he said once. You mistake memory for ghosts. But Imhotep began to worry. He asked for one final inspection of the internal chambers, just the two of them.
The pharaoh agreed. What happened next is known only
through fragments carvings scratched hastily onto the walls of a storage room, never meant for eyes beyond the inner circle. According to them, deep beneath the core, the two men found something unexpected. A hollow cavity lined not with limestone,
but smooth obsidian. No tools had touched it.
No torch lit it,
but it shimmered faintly, like oil on water. In the center stood a pedestal of alabaster.
Upon it, a simple stone, no inscriptions, no markings, but cold enough to sting through linen. Nebmat-ai stepped toward it, but Imhotep blocked his path.
"It does not belong to you," the priest warned. "It already remembers me." The pharaoh answered. That was the last time Imhotep was seen in daylight.
Official records say he died of fever. The workers whispered otherwise, that the architect now lived inside the stone, eyes open, watching everything. Historians still argue whether Imhotep's disappearance was engineered, voluntary, or a myth, created to sanctify the pyramid's power.
Regardless, his name vanished from royal records, scrubbed so thoroughly that later kings would claim they had designed the monument. And Nebmat-ai changed. He withdrew from public life, appearing only
in ceremonies and festivals.
When he did emerge, he was cloaked in gold and black linen, his skin painted with coal, his face unreadable.
He spoke less, smiled never, but when he raised his arms, the crowd still roared. They didn't worship him, they feared him. He began building more structures, obelisks aligned with constellations, temples with floors that echoed the heartbeat of those who walked them.
His architects began to say they were carving not for people, but for those who walk in shadow, a disturbing phrase quickly banned by the court. But perhaps the most troubling sign came from the weather. The Nile flood, long predictable, began to shift.
Some years, it rose too high, drowning crops. Other years, it barely trickled in.
The high priests of Hapi blamed foreign gods.
Nebmat-ai said nothing.
Meanwhile, a subtle resistance brewed. Nobles, once content to drink wine under painted ceilings, began meeting in secret. Their robes were silk, but their whispers were sharp. "He's not aging," one of them said.
"Have you noticed? Not a wrinkle. Paint," another replied.
"Or maybe something worse. Do gods need sleep?"
a third asked. No one answered. Even his closest attendants began to fear him.
One eunuch, a boy named Kamu, once peeked behind the curtain of the pharaoh's chamber after sunset. He emerged white-faced and speechless, trembling like a leaf in dry wind.
He never spoke again, and was later found walking the banks of the Nile, repeating only one word, empty. It was around this time that an unusual visitor arrived at court, a foreign emissary from the north, bearing gifts of amber and sea glass. She was tall, cloaked, her voice low and unaccented. She asked to meet the pharaoh privately. They spoke for hours alone.
No one knows what passed between them.
But after she left, Nebmat-ai ordered the construction of a hidden chamber beneath the pyramid, accessible only by a tunnel disguised as a grain silo. And then came the eclipse. It was not predicted.
No priest had foreseen it.
The sun vanished in the middle of the feast of Sekhmet.
People screamed, animals fled. The sky turned the color of bruised figs. Nebmat-ai did not flinch. He stepped into the darkness, lifted his staff carved from meteoric iron and declared, "You are only shadow.
I am the flame."
When the light returned, he collapsed. For days, he drifted between sleep and silence, tended only by Khemu, the boy who still hadn't spoken a word since that night behind the curtain. But somehow, the pharaoh's health returned sharper,
stronger, as if the eclipse had drained the sickness from him. And so came a new decree. The pharaoh would no longer eat.
He claimed nourishment came now from dreams, from contact with the divine. His food sat untouched, his wine dried in golden cups. The court called it a miracle. The people called it madness. But none dared challenge him. He had become a riddle carved
in human shape, one that only the gods could read. And still, the pyramid stood, silent, watching. By the 30th year of his reign, Nebmat-ai was no longer a man in the eyes of his people.
He was a statue that blinked, a whisper from the underworld, a walking prayer.
Farmers bowed when his shadow passed over grain.
Children were told not to speak his name after sunset.
Even the priests now offered incense to his image before invoking the gods, and still, the pyramid watched. Yet something was wrong. The pyramid of breathless stone had begun to shift.
Subtle cracks appeared along its western face,
not large enough
to see from a distance, but enough that workers were quietly sent to chisel and patch under cover of night.
Inside, the air turned colder.
Dust fell from unseen corners.
The chamber that held the heart, the obsidian box placed atop the alabaster pedestal, began to hum again. No one dared touch it. The more superstitious among the staff insisted the box was feeding.
On what? No one knew.
One mason claimed. He heard it breathe. He fled, vanished into the desert, and was later found 3 villages away, scribbling spirals into clay with his fingernails. Nebmat-ai ignored the warnings. Instead, he ordered the construction of a second monument, smaller, more angled, and stranger in design.
It rose quickly, too quickly, so quickly, in fact, that its sides had to be bent inward to compensate for the miscalculations. Thus, the bent pyramid was born. Some whispered it was a mistake.
Others said it was deliberate, a symbol of balance between earth and sky.
But those who worked on it said otherwise. They said the angles were changed after the voice returned, that
voice, if it ever existed, came only to Nebmat-ai. He began to speak of the listener, an unseen being older than any god the Egyptians knew.
He claimed it waited beneath the desert, deep in the bedrock, speaking in a language of echoes.
And he insisted it had given him the vision for the bent pyramid. Historians still argue whether Nebmat-ai's obsession was religious, political, or a sign of growing madness. Certainly, the records take on a stranger tone during these years.
Edicts began to be written in mirror image hieroglyphs.
His seal changed shape, morphing from the traditional cartouche to an eye within a hexagon, a symbol that appears nowhere else in Egyptian history. And then came the death of Khemu. The boy, now grown, had remained loyally at the pharaoh's side, silent since his traumatic glimpse into the royal chamber.
But one morning, he was found at the foot of the bent pyramid, arms outstretched, eyes open, no sign of injury. His body bore a single marking across the chest, a spiral of blue ink, drawn with a line so fine it resembled thread. Nebmat-ai held vigil beside the body for 3 nights, neither eating nor sleeping.
On the 4th morning, he stood before his court and declared, "We have built upwards.
Now we must build inward." He ordered the excavation of tunnels beneath both pyramids.
Not burial chambers, those already existed, but what he called listening shafts. They were narrow, steep, and braced with cedar from Lebanon. Workers lowered themselves by rope, only to emerge days later with wide eyes and strange dreams. One
engineer reported seeing stars that moved beneath the ground.
Another claimed she heard her dead mother singing from the walls. Fewer and fewer returned. But the digging continued. Nebmat-ai supervised the design himself, sketching diagrams in the sand, muttering measurements under his breath. He often spoke,
of alignment of points where sound met light, where stone could speak back if carved just right. Imhotep's old quarters, long abandoned, was suddenly locked and guarded.
Smoke was seen rising from its chimney. Some claimed the architect had returned. Others said the pharaoh was conducting experiments in memory. Meanwhile, the court fractured. Nobles who once praised Nebmat-I now begged the high priests to intervene. They spoke of chaos, of imbalance, of a king no longer tethered to Mart, the divine order, but Mart, to Nebmat-I, had become small.
He now invoked other names once not found in any temple scroll.
Words that hurt to pronounce. Symbols that shimmered wrong even when drawn correctly. One late evening, a scribe named Hori was caught trying to smuggle a copy of the pharaoh's blueprints out of the palace.
He was interrogated, then executed quietly. Before his death, he
told his captors, he's not building pyramids anymore.
He's building doors.
Whether metaphor or madness, the phrase took hold because deep beneath the bent pyramid, construction had ceased, not from failure, but from fear. The last team sent down had not returned.
When a second team entered, they found only one of the original workers curled into a crevice, whispering. It opened, and something looked back. Nebmat-I was unfazed. Let it look, he said. Let it see what I have made.
And then, one night, the stars aligned, not metaphorically, literally. The constellation of Sopdet Sirius rose at an angle unseen for centuries, directly over the bent pyramid's western face. A shaft carved into its upper tier caught the light, funneling it downward into the central chamber. Inside, the obsidian box vibrated not just audibly, but visibly, pulsing like a heartbeat. Nebmat-I entered alone. He stayed inside for 2 nights. No food,
no servants, no guards. When he emerged, he spoke only one sentence. I have seen the other side. He cancelled all festivals. He closed the temple gates. He ordered the burial of his likenesses, not destruction, but interment. As though even statues must sleep, the court panicked.
The people wept. And in the shadows, the whispers returned. He was no longer building monuments. He was building a way through. The boy king sat on a throne too large for his frame, wrapped in cloth of gold, his feet not quite touching the lion-carved platform beneath him.
His name was Tutankhamun, but in those early days, even he barely knew what it meant.
The palace murmured with ritual and resentment. The walls still remembered Nebmat-I. Tutankhamun had not known him. The records of that reign had been rearranged, names chiseled of walls, symbols scraped smooth.
Temples once dedicated to the listener now stood empty, their stones damp with silence. But whispers clung like incense smoke. They called. Tutankhamun, the Restoration King, at just 9 years old, he was crowned in Thebes under the watchful gaze of priests and advisors.
He restored the old gods, reopened the temples, and on papyrus, at least returned Egypt to Mart. But
Tutankhamun was no fool.
Even young, he could sense the unease that danced through the court's hallways.
Everyone smiled too quickly. Everyone spoke too softly.
He was king. Yes, but only when the elders allowed it. Chief among them was I, the vizier, a man whose patience had outlived 3 reigns.
His face was smooth as polished stone, but his eyes glimmered like blades. He spoke sweetly to Tutankhamun, taught him the gods' names, corrected his posture during ceremonies, and quietly made the decisions that actually mattered. Beside him stood Horemheb, commander of the army.
Less subtle, his advice was direct and laced with steel. A crown must be protected, he once told the boy, or someone else wears it. And so the young pharaoh ruled, but under supervision. He signed scrolls he hadn't read. He nodded at priests who spoke in circles. He performed rituals to gods he'd only just met. His every step shadowed by men who had outlived kings. Still,
Tutankhamun was curious.
He asked questions the court didn't like. He wandered parts of the palace others avoided. And one day, behind a collapsed wall in the lower storerooms, he found something strange. A stone box, plain, dusty.
Its lid sealed with resin.
No markings. When he pried it open, he found a mask. Not a funerary one, but something different.
Made of a metal he didn't recognize.
Dark, with a faint shimmer like water under moonlight. A folded linen was tucked beneath it, and on that linen, a single phrase written in mirror hieroglyphs. Do not wake the second heart. He took it to I. The vizier paled, even as he smiled.
An old toy, he said, from the reign of Nebmat-I. That king loved his
inventions. But why was it hidden? The boy asked it. I said nothing. That night, the box was gone from Tutankhamun's chamber.
No one mentioned it again. Still,
Something shifted. The boy began dreaming of strange cities, of rivers that flowed backward, of stars that blinked in rhythms. He began asking about pyramids, why the bent pyramid had been sealed, why Nepat I's name had been stricken. No one gave him answers. So, like any clever child, he found his own. He sent trusted servants to the archives, old scrolls, forgotten maps. He began copying symbols by candlelight, speaking words not taught in temple schools.
He even asked his craftsman to make him a
New seal, not the royal cartouche, but a spiral. His queen, Anka Cinnamon, worried. Your dreams are bleeding into your waking, she warned. The priests are watching. He only smiled, so let them watch. I need to know, and so began a quiet rebellion.
A boy pharaoh digging into a past the kingdom was trying to forget. At night, he would sneak from his chamber and wander the palace's deeper levels, rooms no longer mapped, corridors that smelled of dust and dried blood. In one, he found a mural, hidden behind a layer of crumbling plaster.
It showed two pyramids, one straight, one bent. Between them, a figure in gold, arms raised, surrounded by dark spirals. Beneath it was an inscription. He who opened the breath of stone now speaks.
Only in silence, Tutankhamun had it covered again. But he didn't forget. The more he learned, the more his health faded.
A limp developed in his left leg. Headaches came daily.
His breath shortened after even simple prayers.
The physicians said it was nothing, a passing weakness, a curse of youth, that at night he heard whispers, not voices. Whispers, like cloth dragged over wet stone, like secrets too old to pronounce. Historians still argue whether Tutankhamun was cursed, poisoned, or simply unlucky.
His death came young, just 19, and official records claim it was a fall, or infection, or a malformed foot. But those who prepared his body noticed strange things. The embalmers worked quickly, too quickly. His heart was missing, not removed, but
never placed. Instead, his chest cavity held a black resin unknown to their usual recipes.
His coffin bore mismatched inscriptions, and the gold mask seemed off.
Not wrong, exactly, just not meant for him, and buried with him, hidden in a side compartment, was a small spiral carved in obsidian.
No one claimed it.
No one knew its purpose. The tomb was sealed. The sands covered the valley. The boy king vanished for over 3,000 years.
No one spoke his name, until a man named Howard Carter cracked the seal, broke through the dust, and entered a chamber glittering with impossible gold. He found the mask.
The treasures, the chariot, but he never found the whispers. Not at first.
Carter stood at the threshold, eyes wide, breath caught in his throat.
The candle in his hand flickered as cool a surge from the chamber, air that hadn't stirred in more than 3 millennia.
Behind him, Lord Carnarvon pressed forward, his
voice barely above a whisper. Can you see anything? And Carter replied, with a voice equally hushed, yes, wonderful things. But what he didn't say, what no one ever really said, was that the moment his foot crossed into their tomb, something shifted. The tomb of Tutankhamun dazzled with impossible riches. Gilded chariots, inlaid furniture, games, weapons, even food meticulously preserved for a journey into the afterlife. But something was off. Amid all the splendor, it was the disorder that whispered the loudest, chests stacked the wrong way. The king's burial mask didn't quite match his other iconography.
His canopic jars meant to hold his organs were incomplete.
And strangest of all, his heart was missing in Egyptian belief. The heart was essential for judgment in the afterlife. Weighed against the feather of Mart, it determined one's fate.
To be buried without it was more than an oversight, it was sabotage. Carter documented everything, meticulously.
His notes, sketches, and photographs filled volumes. But even he couldn't explain why the tomb, sealed so hurriedly, had never been looted. Why tomb robbers who had ransacked every other noble's grave nearby had left this one untouched, as if something had kept them out, or warned them off. Among the artifacts, Carter found a small item that the official records didn't linger on. A spiral carved into black stone, about the size of a coin.
No hieroglyphs.
No context. He pocketed it. He shouldn't have. The stories started immediately. Staff falling ill. Lights flickering in the desert night. A cobra symbol of Pharaoh's divine protection slithering into Carter's home and swallowing his canary, the lucky bird he'd brought to Luxor. Then came Lord Carnarvon's death. A mosquito bite turned septic. At the precise moment of his passing, Cairo's power went out. The newspapers devoured the tale, their headlines gleaming with talk of the mummy's curse. Of course, most scholars rolled their eyes, but quietly in their papers, They whispered too. The spiral disappeared from Carter's journals, gone from his catalogues.
But his niece recalled seeing it once placed atop a stack of documents in his study, just before he fell ill for the first time. He never looked quite right after that, she said years later.
As if something in him had
dimmed. Historians still argue whether the curse was real, psychological, or fabricated by eager reporters. But a curious trend emerged. Those who entered the tomb or handled certain items, particularly those from the inner burial chamber, were more likely to die young or vanish into obscurity. One German researcher, fascinated by the spiral, attempted to replicate its shape using electrum. He claimed it emitted a hum when placed near certain quartz fragments. His house burned down 6 weeks later.
no survivors. Still, the world was entranced.
Tutankhamun, once a footnote pharaoh, now became Egypt's golden boy.
His mask eyes lined with lapis, lips serene grace magazine covers.
Exhibitions of his treasures drew millions, but beneath the fame, quiet things stirred. In 1932, a group of engineers mapping underground water flows near the Valley of the Kings detected an anomaly. Beneath Tutankhamun's tomb lay another chamber larger, but inaccessible. Their equipment jammed repeatedly.
Measurements fluctuated.
Eventually, they gave up.
The desert, they said, was a difficult place for certainty. It wasn't until decades
later that a British team, using ground-penetrating radar, confirmed the anomaly's existence.
A hidden chamber, buried deeper than any other.
But attempts to access it failed.
Drills broke.
Sand collapsed in strange patterns, and once, a technician's hand blistered instantly upon touching the exposed limestone. Back in museums, curators began noticing oddities.
A dagger found in Tutankhamun's wrappings made from meteoritic iron began to rust, despite climate control.
One researcher claimed to hear faint whispers when handling it.
Like reeds brushing together, he said.
But indoors,
in Oxford, no one believed him. He later recanted.
Then disappeared. The spiral appeared again in 1976 in the personal effects of a retired Egyptian guard. He claimed he found it behind a loose stone near the boy king's sarcophagus. He called it the Eye of Breath. He died 3 days after showing it to a collector in Cairo.
The collector's house
collapsed during a freak sandstorm.
The object was never recovered. Back in the valley, the tomb's atmosphere changed. Tour guides reported lights dimming near the burial chamber.
Tourists fainted.
One child woke from a nap in her parents' arms and whispered, "He's not sleeping anymore, of course." None of this made it into official reports, but the dreams did. Researchers, guards, even archaeologists reported similar dreams while staying near the site. A golden boy wandering a garden of blackened statues. A voice humming beneath sand.
A pyramid tilting just slightly in the distance.
One man described it as a city with no doors, only mirrors when they shared their stories. They always found someone else who had dreamt the same thing. One American scholar became obsessed. She believed the spiral was not a symbol, but a map.
She proposed it described a different kind of pyramid, buried beneath the bent pyramid.
"It's not about height," she wrote. "It's about rotation." She was laughed out of academia.
Then, in 1999, she vanished while hiking alone in Dasha.to this day. Her last message remains unsent in her outbox. It opens from the inside. Meanwhile, the tourists keep coming.
The boy king still draws crowds.
His image still sells keychains, books, t-shirts, but in the deeper corners of the archives, tucked behind preserved scrolls and forgotten hieroglyphs, the spiral appears again and again.
Never named, never explained, and always
slightly different.
By the time the 21st century rolled around, most of the world's fascination with pharaohs had been sanitized, polished into clean museum narratives, charming documentaries, and big-budget movies where gods had British accents. Egypt became more postcode than enigma, a place where sunburned tourists wandered past half-crumbled monuments while sipping bottled water and quoting Wikipedia. But not everyone was content with the surface. Dr.
Lala Hassan had grown up in Cairo, the child of
a Coptic schoolteacher and a Muslim stonecutter.
She spent her youth darting between alley cats and papyrus stores, her eyes always drawn to the skyline pyramids on one side, satellite towers on the other.
By 30, she'd published 2 academic books, both focused on overlooked patterns in ancient temple design.
People called her brilliant. People also called her unstable. What they didn't call her, at least not to her face, was obsessed. She had stumbled on the spiral too.
Not the actual object. Of course, it was still missing.
But she'd found copies.
Etchings in tombs, rarely. Photographed. decorative flourishes in unexpected places, a spiral curling behind Isis's shoulder in a minor shrine near Saqqara, another etched onto the heel of a statue of Sobek, god of crocodiles and chaos. Lala compiled them, logged them, traced their mathematical ratio. It wasn't quite Fibonacci, it wasn't quite golden, but it moved. The geometry, when rotated and folded in certain ways, became something else, a map. She was sure of it. She began calling it the Spiral Code. Her third book bore the title, subtitled Hidden Pathways in Egyptian Ritual Topography.
Most archaeologists rolled their eyes.
A few fringe theorists embraced it with open arms to open.
Soon, her name was being linked with aliens, Atlantis, and interdimensional nonsense. Invitations to speak dried up. So she returned to the valley.
Quietly, privately funded. She wasn't looking for Tutankhamun anymore. She was looking for what might be beneath him. Her permits allowed only non-invasive methods.
She set up equipment near Tomb KV-62, far enough to avoid international scrutiny, but close enough for her instruments to ping against. Something Dota and Echo, a tunnel that didn't appear on maps, an air pocket too narrow to be natural.
What's
more, the magnetometer fluctuated only when the sun rose, never when it set.
As if the anomaly responded to light. Then came the blackouts. Power cut out twice in 1 week.
Her gear reset without warning.
Timestamp scrambled.
Once, her GPS placed her in unknown quadrant O. She laughed it off.
Mostly, until the humming started dotty first. She assumed it was wind.
But it never rose or fell.
It didn't match the air's behavior. It sounded internal, like a resonance in her own bones. She stopped sleeping through the night. Her dreams grew vivid. One featured a stairwell spiraling downward. No end in sight. Every few steps, torches flickered in alcoves, but no flame touched them. Just light, cold and steady. Another dream. A doorway where the lintel was shaped like
a looped rope. Her fingers brushed it. Static surged up her arm. Then came the eye, not literal.
Just a sensation. Being watched, not by a person, but by the space itself. She began to see spirals outside the dig, drawn into dust patterns, etched into driftwood near the Nile. Once, a pigeon flew past and its shadow curled like one. The deeper she leaned, the more reality.
Tilted, she tried to explain it to her assistant, Zaid, a soft-spoken geology student from Alexandria.
He humored her until he didn't. One day, he found her crouched in the sand, drawing a spiral over and over with her finger.
When he asked what she was doing, she said, "He's correcting my math." Zaid quit that night. Still, Lala continued. She found an inscription on an overlooked shard from Dir el-Medina.
It mentioned the place of bending time.
The phrase was rare, likely symbolic,
but nearby glyphs made it strange. Cartouches twisted into unrecognizable shapes, half faces instead of whole. One figure looked familiar until she realized it was missing a mouth. Historians still argue whether ancient Egyptians had a formal
library system.
Some claim the House of Life, a kind of archive temple, served this role.
Lala believed the spiral was a key to such places.
Secret repositories of memory, buried so deeply that even their guardians forgot where they
lay. She once wrote, "It's not that the pharaohs were hiding something from us.
They were hiding something from each other."
Her obsession drew attention, not from universities, from a man named Samir Abaza, a former diplomat turned collector of spiritual antiquities. His name was whispered in Cairo's coffee shops
and joked about in the margins of academic conferences. He believed Egypt had once connected to other realms.
Through resonance, through shape, through intention, he offered Lala full funding, no restrictions.
All he asked was access to her findings. She hesitated,
then agreed. The dig moved quietly into a private parcel, walled off from public view. They brought sonic equipment, a deep core, imager, even thermal drones. Nothing worked until they started singing, a strange idea one Lala hadn't suggested.
One Sami's team insisted on.
They sang ancient hymns reconstructed phonetically from pyramid texts.
And the ground responded, just once, a thrum, a vibration strong enough to crack a lens. But it left a trace, a soft indentation in the sand, like a spiral sunk into the earth. Samir smiled. Lala didn't. They dug. What they found was not a chamber dot. It was a door, smooth, featureless, stone, darker than basalt, cooler than the desert air. No handles, no seams, only a faint groove tracing a spiral, just wide enough for a fingertip. Lala touched it. Nothing happened, until she slept. That night, she dreamt of herself, only older, standing at the same door.
The older Lala turned. placed her hand to the spiral and whispered something in a language she didn't recognize. When she woke, her fingernail was blackened. She never spoke of it to Samir. She just packed quietly.
The next morning, and disappeared. All she left behind was a journal, closed with a strip of cloth shaped like a spiral. The first page read, "Beneath the Pharaohs are the echoes."
Beneath the echoes is the song. She never returned to the valley.
But some say she was seen years later, wandering through the temple of Seti in Abydos, whispering to the walls, as if asking them a question, one they might still be answering. Word of Dr. Lala Hassan's disappearance spread fast, though mostly in hushed circles. Egypt's archaeological community wasn't keen on drawing attention to fringe episodes, especially ones involving humming dirt and dream-induced excavation. The ministry filed it under personal withdrawal. Her sponsor, Samir Baza, had his own spin. She achieved clarity and moved on, whatever that meant, but the journal she left behind didn't vanish. A digital scan made its way to an
anonymous internet forum for historical anomalies, buried under threads on Roman time travel and Viking UFOs. One user, posting under the handle Osiriseko, uploaded several pages high-res images annotated with speculative captions like, "Know the spiral geometry non-Euclidean," and dream parallels, Jungian archetype or divine memory.
That's where David Quinn saw it. David was not a historian, not even close. He was a night security guard at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, a college dropout with a past in graphic design and a soft spot for conspiracies. Most of his shift was spent wandering dim halls, listening to old Coast to Coast AM episodes, and staring at the Rosetta Stone replica near the gift shop. But that spiral, he'd seen it before, not in a museum. In his grandmother's attic, tucked into an old black trunk she said belonged to your great-uncle George, the weird one who talked to snakes. David remembered opening it once when he was 10, hoping for treasure, and finding only musty robes, a rusted compass, and a hand-drawn map. Right in the center, a spiral dark ink on yellow paper. Now it was online, in Layla's journal. He dug through his closet that same night, and found the old map again.
A miracle it hadn't crumbled. The paper felt thick, too thick, as if there were layers. He held it up to the light. There were faint symbols beneath the ink. He drove to the museum early the next day and used the UV scanner in the conservation lab, a perk of knowing the right intent.
Under ultraviolet, hidden glyphs shimmered too. Life around the spiral, cartouches, starbursts, lines of script, all surrounding a name he recognized from a dusty Egypt documentary he once watched at 3 am. Neferkes Menkaure, a name that had haunted Egyptologists for decades. Menkaure was a figure shrouded in speculation, possibly a brother, cousin, or even wife of Akhenaten, possibly a CO regent, or perhaps just a scribal error turned legend. Some said he ruled briefly before Tutankhamun. Others claimed he never existed at all. The mummy in KV-55. Maybe him, maybe not.
Historians still argue whether Menkaure was a real pharaoh, a composite identity, or a deliberately erased figure. David didn't care about scholarly debate. He cared that this map had been in his family for a century, and now much to code found in a spiral door beneath the Valley of the Kings. He scanned the map, uploaded it anonymously to the same forum, and waited. It exploded. Within a week, podcasts latched onto it. Within 2, Reddit was ablaze.
A YouTuber, known for his conspiracy debunking videos, called it a modern hoax with medieval flair, which only made it go more viral. The image made its way to Dr. Nora Yeltayeb, a linguist at Oxford with a fondness for fringe cases. Nora was the first to translate the underscript correctly. It wasn't just a name. It was a direction. Face the dying sun. Walk the sand that sings. She stared at the map's curve. If mirrored, the spiral's tail lined up with the path between Luxor and the western cliffs. A route not taken by most tourists or most scholars. There were no known tombs there, just hard stone and stories of jinn. She booked a flight. By the time Nora arrived in Egypt, the spiral had become a movement. A dozen small expeditions were forming, some academic, some less so. One group claimed the spiral symbol unlocked a frequency gate. Another was broadcasting chants via portable speakers along desert trails, hoping for resonance openings. A third simply meditated in spiral patterns on temple floors, waiting for anything to happen. Nora wanted none of it. She had a backpack, a translator app, and 3 batteries for her drone. The cliffs were empty, barren, until she found the echo, not a visual one,
An auditory one.
Every time she clapped her hands, the sound bounced oddly like the wall didn't exist, or extended farther than visible.
She sent her drone upward, scanning the rock dot at his sunset. A shadow shifted. A hairline crack formed a perfect loop visible only at a certain angle. She climbed up with gloved fingers, feeling along the edges.
There was no seam, but the surface was cool, like Layla's door. And in the center, a faint spiral, half buried in stone. She pressed her palm to it. Nothing. She whispered the phrase from the map. Still nothing. Then, just as she turned to leave, the wind changed. A note sounded low, pure, like a flute track. Underground, the rock vibrated, not enough to shake dust, but enough to make her teeth feel loose. She stepped back. Nothing else happened, but the spiral had deepened visibly, like something beneath had stirred. Nora returned to her hotel, sat
On the edge of the bed, and tried to rationalize. Her rational mind told her it was geological coincidence. Her deepest self, the one that had translated hieroglyphs in her dreams, since she was 8 said something else. Spenkara was not lost. He was hidden, not by his own will, because the spiral
was not a key to a door dart, it was a lock. A seal meant to hold something in, something that had already begun to turn. A week later, the desert was crawling with strangers. They came with tents, drones, hydration packs, and theories, some with degrees, others with devotional tattoos in ancient scripts they couldn't read. Spiral symbols appeared on water bottles, bandanas, and even shaved into heads. Someone spray-painted one on a camel. The locals called them the Circle People. It wasn't meant as a compliment. Nora stayed on the edge of it all. She watched as they gathered near the echoing cliff face, chanting, whispering, analyzing soil. One group claimed the spiral was an ancient sound-based language.
Another insisted it was a stargate, and that planetary alignments would open it any day. Now, a woman from Ontario had brought her chihuahua, declaring it a spiritual compass.
It peed on the spiral. The Ministry of Antiquities wasn't thrilled. Their official stance was firm. No tomb exists west of that ridge, but after footage of the spiral symbol went viral paired with an AI-enhanced video of Lala Hassan touching the stone door. The ministry changed tactics.
They cordoned off the area, issued a vague statement about protecting potential cultural heritage, and quietly dispatched an internal team. That's when David Quinn showed up. Yes, the museum night guard with the attic map and 0 qualifications. He'd somehow landed a freelance gig with an indie documentary crew covering esoteric geographies of Egypt. His job? Logistics. Mostly lugging cables and keeping the solar charger pointed at the sun, but on day 3, his map proved useful.
Again, a GPS overlay showed the spiral's path cutting across a second flower region area locals called Jebel El Sur, or Hill of Whispers.
The place had long been avoided, not for any official reason, but because nomads claimed voices came from it at night. Wind, probably, or so David told himself until he heard them too. Not full words, just murmurs, like someone humming underwater.
Low, rhythmic, not quite human. He walked the perimeter at dawn and found a second spiral. Not carved, not painted. Grown, a ring of grass, actual green blades in the middle of hard-packed sand.
A perfect spiral, a meter wide.
Nora examined the
area with her scanner.
No irrigation.
No underground spring. No footprints inside the ring.
Just one strand of black linen caught on a rock. The material matched priestly garments from the Amarna period. Historians still argue whether priesthoods in the later 18th dynasty retained Akhenaten's monotheistic reforms or reverted to traditional rites under pressure. But the cloth bore a glyph linked directly to the sun disk deity Akhenaten had once elevated above all others. And beneath it, barely visible in the sand, another inscription. Light without balance burns the world. Theories multiplied. Some thought it was a warning, others an invitation. That night, someone breached the ministry perimeter. Nora was asleep in her tent when the vibrations started, subtle at first, like a train rolling far beneath the earth. The noise built into a low hum, then cracked into a brief whine.
Everyone emerged from their tents.
The spiral on the cliff wall had lit up dimly, softly as though its stone had absorbed a memory of sunlight and was now exhaling it. A single crack had appeared down its center. They approached in silence. Someone, Nora would later swear it was the Canadian with the chihuahua, reached out and pressed their hand to the stone. The light faded instantly. The crack widened, then nothing. No. Explosion. No dramatic opening. just a pause in the wind, as if the desert were holding its breath.
And then, faintly, the door receded smoothly, quietly revealing a tunnel behind it, just wide enough to walk single file. Nora stepped in first. It was
Dry, warmer than the outside air, and lined with something she didn't expect, obsidian.
polished slabs perfectly fit, reflecting her flickering headlamp.
The corridor sloped downward, about 10 meters in. She noticed the carvings, not hieroglyphs, symbols, spirals, eyes, suns with too many rays. David followed, mumbling nervously. This is the part in the horror movie where you all die, and I go back to fixing gift shop signage. They passed through a narrow arch into a chamber the size of a city bus. At its center stood a black stone pillar, maybe 2 meters tall, edged with thousands of tiny spirals.
Hovering just above the pillar was a single gold disc spinning, impossibly suspended. No wires.
No magnets, just floating. It pulsed. Once, then, again. Everyone froze. A whisper not in the room, but in their minds passed through them like a breeze through tall grass. Not language, but sensation. Awe, hunger,
Recognition. The disc dimmed. On the far wall, an alcove opened.
inside, a skeleton, but not entirely human, longer limbs, a wider ribcage, and a skull shaped like an inverted teardrop.
A golden mask rested. Beside it, identical to the iconography of Sankara as rendered in 2 surviving reliefs, both of which Egyptologists dismissed as artistic errors, the chamber's temperature dropped.
Lights flickered. David pointed at the mask. Is it me? Or is it breathing? The metal shimmered just slightly. Nora stepped closer, under the mask. Something shifted. Not bones. Something inside the bones. She turned to leave, but the tunnel,
Behind them was gone.
not sealed. Gone as if it had never existed. Just a blank wall of obsidian. One of the crew screamed. The black pillar vibrated. Spirals spinning faster. The golden disc emitted a high-pitched note that made everyone drop
To their knees. Blood from noses, ears, eyes.
Then silence. When Nora opened her eyes, she was alone. The pillar was dark, the skeleton gone, and the spiral on her hand. She didn't remember getting a tattoo was glowing faintly, like hot iron in deep night. She
Heard her own voice, though she didn't speak. He was buried in time, not in earth.
The tunnel returned by morning. It didn't open with ceremony.
No dramatic pulse of light.
Just a subtle flicker, and there it was. Exactly where it had been before, like a mirage that had taken the night off.
But when Nora stepped back through,
There was no one inside.
no David,
No camera crew.
no floating disc.
Just the quiet hush of obsidian and her own breath ricocheting off the polished walls. Outside, the spiral people were packing up. Some had gotten spooked by the nights. Vibrations. Others insisted it was the sign they were waiting for, and promptly declared their work complete. The ministry moved faster. They sealed the entrance behind a false dune and labeled the area of limits pending investigation.
Anyone who asked was told it had been a sinkhole.
A very symbolic one, someone muttered. Nora stayed behind. So did the whisper in her mind. It was barely there, a flicker, like remembering a name before it slips away again. But it pulsed irregularly whenever she touched stone, especially ancient stone.
It grew stronger when she entered temples or handled relics. And then came the dreams. Not nightmares, exactly.
More like flashbacks to events that weren't hers. A golden hall lit by no flames.
A throne flanked by ibises, scorpions, and jackals.
A child with obsidian eyes pointing to the stars. She always woke just as her own voice whispered. The second spiral lies where the river once died. She knew where that was. The Wadi El Mulek, the Valley of the Kings.
Specifically, a dry tributary at the far edge, where no tomb had ever been recorded. The place was just stone and sand and silence.
But when she arrived, her scanner lit up. Something below. Deep, and not carved, constructed. She hired a private dig team quietly.
No viral videos this time.
Just 5 people sworn to silence, including a disgraced Italian archaeologist, a teenage tech prodigy, and a Sudanese guide named Alim who claimed to have once seen a man walk into a sandstorm and never come out. The first week yielded nothing but heatstroke and tarantulas. The second week, they hit limestone, smooth, artificially placed, with a spiral chiseled into its surface. Not a carving, exactly.
More like an impression, as if something had pressed it into the stone with enormous force, and then vanished. They broke through on the 12th day. What they found didn't match any known Egyptian architecture.
No pillars.
No hieroglyphs.
Just a vast open shaft, perfectly circular, descending hundreds of meters in a slow, spiraling ramp. The walls were lined with mica reflective and warm to the touch. Even in the cold subterranean air, they descended in silence, about halfway down. The ramp opened into an alcove. Inside, another skeleton. This one human, clad in priestly robes with fingers splayed outward and mouth frozen in a scream. A broken chain lay beside it, cold, impossibly thin, ending in a spiral amulet. The inscription on the floor read, "I sealed the light. Forgive me." Historians still argue whether Pharaoh I's successor to Tutankhamun was a legitimate ruler or simply a priest who seized power. But this chamber's architecture resembled nothing from his reign or any reign. Alim murmured a prayer. The tech prodigy, Leela, tried to scan the amulet. The scanner shut off permanently. They continued down to the base of the shaft. The spiral ended in a small circular room. It contained only one thing, a mirror, not bronze, not glass, something else.it was black, yet reflective, cold, yet not metallic. Nora approached, drawn by a pulse she now recognized as coming not from her hand or her thoughts, but from the spiral inside her mind. She touched the mirror.it, rippled. Her reflection stepped forward, but it wasn't quite her. Its eyes were too old. Its mouth smiled too early, and it didn't blink when she did. Then it spoke. "You are late." The voice was hers, layered with something else, something deeper, richer, hollow like a tomb. The others backed away. Norris stayed frozen. The mirror continued. The spiral decays. The balance must be restored. She asked what that meant. The reflection didn't answer. Instead, it pointed behind her. When she turned, the chamber had changed and no longer stone, but a glowing map lines of gold, tracing what looked like a city. Thebes, once capital of Egypt, only older. Beneath the Thebes she knew. Streets, buildings, canals, all beneath the known ruins. The reflection whispered, "Where the pharaohs feared to tread, then everything went dark." Nora woke on the sand, the chamber, the mirror. The others gone, just her, and a faint spiral pressed into the earth beside her hand. She stood, dusted herself off, and looked east, toward Thebes, toward the Nile, toward something she could feel humming just beneath the earth, waiting, not asleep, not dead, just listening. Nora didn't speak for 3 days, not in English, not in Arabic, not even in the jumbled whispers that had started curling at the edges of her dreams. Alim stayed close to close. He brought her tea that tasted of mint and dirt, and asked no questions. Leela had vanished. The Italian archaeologist had packed up and flown back to Naples before sunrise, muttering about curses and fractures in time. Nora understood. She'd seen them too. She was done with tunnels this time. It would be ruins. Proper ruins. Tangible stones and fragmented columns. Not vanishing mirrors or screaming priests. The spiral had pointed toward ancient Thebes, or rather, what lay beneath it. So, she returned to the city of the dead. Luxor was thick with heat and memory. Tour buses groaned. Vendors hawked plastic anks. Somewhere beneath it all, the bones of gods were waiting. She started with Karnak, not the tourist fad, but the sealed sections, the underground chambers only visible through magnetometry surveys and satellite scans. She bribed a night guard with a bar of Swiss chocolate. He led her into the old storehouse where Pharaoh Seti II's cartouches were still visible beneath centuries of graffiti. She didn't need the hieroglyphs. Her hand already knew the path. She pressed her palm to the floor.it, hummed. There, beneath the old stone vault, she could feel it like a second heartbeat, and then it opened, not with grandeur, not even with dust, just a soft, mechanical click, and a portion of the floor dissolved downward, revealing a narrow passage that curved unnaturally to perfectly to the right. It didn't feel Egyptian. It felt engineered. She descended and a torch. The walls glowed faintly, as if alive. The passageway sloped downward, then leveled into a vast atrium that dwarfed any known hyper-style hall. Here, there were no gods, no Osiris, no Horus, no carved falcons or ankhs, just one symbol, repeated over and over in geometric precision. The spiral. Nora stepped forward, careful not to disturb the dustless floor. In the center stood a pillar of black stone, shaped like an obelisk but floating an inch off the ground. Beneath it, spirals spun slowly, not carved, but projected from within the stone itself. A low hum permeated the air, felt more than heard. This wasn't a temple.it was a machine. Historians still argue whether the ancient Egyptians had access to lost forms of energy, or if it's all just fringe fantasy. Most dismiss it entirely.
But as Nora circled the pillar, she noticed that her hand, always warm with the spiral's presence, grew hot. The obelisk reacted, its surface shimmered, and a pulse echoed outward.
The walls responded. They lit up, not with torches or sunlight, but with imagery, moving scenes, like hieroglyphic films. They played in silence, showing a city beneath a city's stone domes, long staircases, elevated canals.
People in linen robes moved in patterns, always spiraling inward.
And then a throne, upon it, a woman. She wore the uraeus, the vulture crown, but no name followed her image. Instead, a spiral flickered at her throat, where the cartouche should be. She raised her hand, and across the wall, something monstrous answered, a shape like a man, but featureless, its face a void of mirrors. Nora stepped back. The pillar flared brighter. Suddenly, a whisper filled the chamber. No mouth, no echo, just a voice, calm and unreadable. She broke the pact. The scenes shifted. Fire, collapse, the spirals cracking, the machine failing, the mirror face being turned, and the woman vanished. Another whisper, balance undone. Nora felt her knees weaken.
Her spiral hand burned now, throbbing with awareness.
She was not a researcher anymore. She was something else.
A carrier, a key.
The floor beneath the obelisk began to split open, 6 clean wedges retracting outward to reveal a second chamber below.
And below that, a stairway that descended into silence. She didn't hesitate. The air shifted the deeper she went, thicker, older, not stale, but filled with a kind of waiting. At the base of the stairs, she found another room, circular again, the floor covered in spirals, each one carved into polished hematite. In the center, a sarcophagus. It pulsed, not with life, but with
memory. Nora approached.
Her fingers brushed the lid, and the lid responded, retracting with impossible grace. Inside was no body, just cloth, and a second spiral, this one made of something translucent and unbreakable.
It hovered slightly above the stone, suspended in invisible force. As she stared, her own spiral hand rose on its own, drawn magnetically toward the object. When they touched, a jolt shot through her. Not pain, something deeper.
A memory, slamming into her from the inside out. She saw herself as someone else standing in the throne room, issuing orders.
Wearing the crown, she had ruled this place. In another life. Historians still argue whether reincarnation was part of Egyptian royal tradition, or a later Greek interpretation layered onto their beliefs. But in that moment, to Nora, it wasn't
a belief, it was a fact. She had been here. She had built this machine. She had sealed the spiral. And now, she had awakened it. A rumble echoed upward through the chamber. The spirals glowed in unison. Above her, the pillar room began to rotate slowly, like gears turning after millennia. And then came a sound he recognized from dreams. The mirror. It had returned, not as glass this time, but as a portal hovering behind her, warping the air. Something moved on the other side. It was time to remember everything. The mirror shimmered with impossible depth. It wasn't a reflection anymore, not really. More like a film of light pretending to be glass, stretched thin across a crack in the world.
Something stood behind it.
Tall, slender, not quite human.
Its limbs moved like silk under water, but its face, or what should have been a face, was just shifting panels of mirrored facets. No eyes, no mouth, just fragments of whatever stood before it, always twisted, always wrong. Nora didn't run. She'd
seen this thing in her dreams.
On the walls, in the spiral.
She had been this thing once, or built it, or bound it. Memory wasn't so much a straight line now, as it was a looping hallway filled with locked doors, each one pulsing under her skin. The chamber pulsed again. The hovering spiral in her palm flickered to life, and the mirror being stepped through.
No footsteps,
no sound,
just a sudden presence, like a wave of heat breaking reality's surface tension.
Nora fell to one knee, not in pain, but in pressure.
Like gravity had remembered something she owed it, the being tilted its head. Then, impossibly,
it spoke, but not aloud. The voice came directly into her bones. You are not her.
Yet you are. Nora forced herself upright, hand trembling. Who are you?
We are balance. Not I.
We. The room vibrated, not from the voice, but from its truth. Historians still argue whether the concept of marked balance, truth, cosmic order was ever meant to be literal, or merely a philosophical
guideline for justice and harmony. But standing before this being, Nora understood the ancient Egyptians might have known far more than they let on.
Balance was not a metaphor. It was alive, You unsealed the anchor. Balance continued. The
wheel has turned. She pointed at the hovering spiral embedded in her palm.
This chose me. No, Balance said. She chose you. Another shift. The mirror flared then split. Images bloomed outward like lotus petals unfolding in slow motion. A city, glowing beneath golden light.
But this was no fantasy reconstruction. It wasn't Karnak or Luxor.
It was older, deeper Abydos, the original one, not the ruins. Not the holy center the historians catalogued. This was the version that came before. Stair-stepped pyramids lined with mirrors, obelisks that hovered, and temples that sang when touched. In this version, energy moved in spirals, and every wall was alive with shifting script. Nora stepped forward instinctively. The spiral in her hand pulsed, and she was there, not physically, but fully. A memory made flesh. She stood at the center of Abydos, robed in black and gold. The crown was heavy on her head, and the spiral burned at her throat like a sun. The priests were gathered around her mirror-faced beings cloaked in silence, and before her, the sky cracked open, a comet.no.
A vessel descending .it didn't crash.it merge. The memory fractured.
Nora stumbled, back in the chamber. Balance stood still. She bargained with the stars, it said.
For knowledge, for control, she built the spiral engine.
She broke time to master it. And she failed. Nora whispered. Balance's mirrored face rippled. No, she succeeded. The spiral in her hand flared again, and then disintegrated,
flowing up her arm like molten light, wrapping around her shoulder, her neck, her jaw. She didn't scream.
She couldn't. The transformation was cold and ancient and absolute. She became the anchor, Balance said. But every cycle needs a counterweight. The chamber began to shift again, walls rotating, stone sliding. With impossible elegance, another passage revealed itself.
Narrow.
Breathing. Nora stepped into it without hesitation. This tunnel didn't let downward. It went sideways between A as she walked. The stone around her flickered with moving images. Past lives. Echoes. One showed her as a priest. Another, a scribe. Another, a child, hiding in reeds while gods argued above the Nile. The hallway ended at a pool. Black, still, endless in its surface. Her reflection shimmered. But it was not.
Her .it was the pharaoh.
The spiral queen. Same eyes. Same spiral. Same burden. She reached down. Touched the water. It reached back. The pool split open, and she fell in. The water wasn't wet. It was memory, flowing in reverse. She passed through dynasties. Menes unifying the two lands, had Shepsut cloaked in false beard and divine will. Akhenaten erasing gods and carving the sun. Each time, the spiral was there hidden, carved in private. Chambers, embedded in the design of crowns, woven into the gold of crooks and flails. Quirky fact. One obscure tablet found near Saqqara bears a single spiral etched on a shard of lapis lazuli, no hieroglyphs, no date.
Egyptologists once laughed it off as the doodle of a bored artisan. But now, Nora understood.
It was a keyhole she surfaced, but not in the chamber. She was above it, above Egypt, looking down. The Nile was a vein of gold. The cities pulsed like neurons. The pyramids, yes. Even the unfinished ones formed a perfect spiral across the land when viewed from high enough. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a circuit, a machine, and she was its conductor. Then Balance spoke again. From nowhere and everywhere. You must choose. The image shattered. She was back in the sarcophagus chamber. The mirror portal now pulsed violently, barely stable. Inside it, a storm churned. Chaos. Unbalance. It seeks to cross, Balance said. The other half. Nora stepped forward. What happens if I refuse? Balance didn't reply, because she already knew if she walked away, the spiral would collapse. The circuit would rupture. The balance would shatter. Again. She was tired of again.so. She placed her hand on the mirror's edge and stepped through. The air changed the moment Nora crossed the threshold. It wasn't colder. It wasn't warmer. It just was.
A place untouched by time or entropy, suspended in a state of waiting.
The sky here was not black, nor blue, but some deep impossible. Here between amethyst and storm cloud, the ground pulsed softly underfoot, not stone, not sand, but something that responded, something living.
A platform unfurled beneath her feet with silent grace, each step lighting up in rings of dull gold. Behind her, the mirror rippled shut. Ahead, a colossal chamber shaped like a helix, walls made entirely of moving script hieroglyphs rearranging. themselves constantly.
The ceiling stretched infinitely upward, a funnel of spinning constellations and ancient sigils.
At the center, suspended midair, was it, the spiral engine. She'd seen fragments before, mosaics, relics, inscriptions, but nothing prepared her for the real thing. It was
Beautiful.
terrifyingly so. In Ouroboros of golden rings, each one rotating in a different direction, encasing a small pulsing star. Light bled from it in long tendrils, forming patterns that looked almost like DNA. Except this wasn't biology. This was time. Mainstream Egyptology would scoff at such fantasy. The consensus held that the Egyptians had no true concept of time travel, only the cyclical notion of eternity, rebirth, and divine recurrence. But here now, Nora could see they'd simply used different tools to reach the same terrifying edge. Where others theorized, they implemented. Then it screamed. Not the spiral, the other. Something had followed her across the mirror, through the engine, buried deep in its pulse, and it was waking up. A form began to take shape within the spirals. Core tall, angular, its surface crawling with patterns that shifted faster than thought. It wasn't balanced. It was opposition. The Egyptians had a name for it to ISFBT, the opposite of Mott. Not just chaos, but the active undoing of harmony.
While balance maintained the pattern, ISFBT was the glitch in the loom. Welcome back.
The voice hissed, deep and many.
You bound me last time.
But you were foolish to return alone. Nora stepped forward. The spiral on her skin burned hotter now, like it was sinking to the engine. I'm not the same as before. No, ISFBT said. You're weaker. She raised her hand and the spiral lines across her body ignited, projecting a golden tether straight into the engine. It struck the core and pulsed. Once, twice. Then the entire structure reacted, spinning faster, emitting notes like a massive crystal harp. The hieroglyphs on the walls began to slow their dance.
Some even stopped, freezing mid-sentence. The machine
was responding to her, remembering her. Then opposition lunged. Its form shot outward, limbs elongating into fractal blades. The floor beneath her split. She fell, but not down. Inward, through rings of memory, fragments of time. She landed in another chamber, still within the spiral structure. This one looked like a temple, stone altars, papyrus scrolls floating.
Mid-air.
Statues of Thoth, Mart, Horus. Except they moved slightly, as though breathing. A slab floated before her, ancient and cracked. Carved on it, the dual names, a tradition of pharaohs to have one name for the world and one for the divine. Hers was there, both versions, but scratched through, rewritten, laid again. Quirky fact. One fringe theory posits that certain erased names in Egyptian cartouches weren't acts of damnatio memoriae, but corrections, as if the rulers had been overwritten in reality. There, roles reassigned retroactively by some unknown force. Nora now suspected they weren't far off. You will not contain me again. Opposition howled from beyond the walls. You were never contained, she replied, only delayed. She reached out and placed her palm on the stone slab dot. It cracked open and released light. A new spiral, blue, white, and sharper, wound down her arm. This one didn't glow, it cut. A weapon, not a key. The chamber melted away as the spiral engine reformed around her. ISFBT descended. The two forces met midair. And no swords. No flames. Just willpower. Code, energy.
The spiral flared with every blow, absorbing the chaos and pushing back.
Nora felt herself splitting again, not dying, not even fracturing, but duplicating. Like echoes of herself were stepping forward to help one from the past, one from a future not yet written. Historians still argue whether Akhenaten's rejection of the old gods was spiritual rebellion or political control. But what if it was neither? What if it was protection? Nora remembered now he'd seen the spiral too. Tried to centralize the flow, build around a single solar node. He failed, and it cost him everything. She wouldn't make the same mistake. She drew all the spirals inward, fused them. Then, with one final pull of breath, she hurled the entire engine outward. The chamber exploded, not in destruction, but in restoration. Time repaired itself backwards. Opposite reversed. Mirrors closed. The Nile flowed upward for a breath before resuming its natural rhythm. She floated there, suspended above the spiral engine's remains, now a quiet orb of silver, small enough to fit in her palm. Balance returned. You have chosen harmony. I chose to remember, it nodded. Though the motion was non-human, you are the last, and the first. She descended gently to the stone floor. The engine faded. The chamber cooled,
and she was alone again, except for the spiral etched now not in her skin, but deep in the stone beneath her feet. The doors opened, leading back to the Temple of Seti. She took the first step. The light outside the Temple of Seti had changed. Nora emerged into a world that felt almost, but not quite the same. The Nile shimmered just as it always had, its surface kissed by late afternoon sun. The air was thick with the scent of mud and date palms, a pleasant heat rising from the stones underfoot.
Yet something in the rhythm of the place pulsed differently now, like the ticking of a clock that had finally aligned its gears. Locals passed her without pause, as though she had always been part of the landscape.
A woman hauling bundles of papyrus gave her a slight nod.
Children chased each other near the temple steps, their laughter clear and echoing.
The modern world was gone, or at least lay it beneath this one.
She was back in ancient Abydos, and fully inside the spiral's calibration, but there was no panic, no alarm at what she had done.
Only a quiet certainty. She had not just travelled through time.
She had rewritten the weave of it. The orb the condensed spiral engine rested, weightless in her palm.
Its surface reflected nothing.
Not light, not her face, not even the world around it.
It simply was. And now it was silent. Behind her, the temple door sealed shot dot in the distance. A procession approached, priests in shimmering white linen, their hands carrying ceremonial fans and staffs, and at their center, a man in gold. Not Pharaoh, but Prince, a young Seti eye, and he looked at her with recognition. Nora had seen his face before in tomb paintings, in museum busts, but now it bore awareness. He nodded once, deep and slow, before speaking words in a language her modern mind should not have known.
Yet she understood them perfectly. You bore the weight, he said.
So now you bear the name. Mainstream history records Seti I.
As a great restorer of temples, of records, of the sacred balance.
What textbooks don't mention is that his reign was marked by dreams.
Strange, fevered dreams that guided his hand and commanded his restorations.
Scholars dismiss it as poetic.
License. Nora now knew better. He wasn't remembering the past.
He was obeying the spiral. The procession circled her once in silence.
Then they passed by. No questions.
No ceremony. It was not a moment of glory. It was simply
completion. She turned toward the river. Across its banks, she saw shapes that didn't belong. Obelisks that had never been built.
Statues of forgotten rulers.
Time had not fully settled yet. The world was rewriting itself around her, bits of history bleeding through as the spiral solidified its chosen timeline. One quirky belief among some fringe Egyptologists claims that the temples were not meant to worship the gods, but to anchor them.
That the gods were never divine in the way we imagine, but echoes of past human acts so monumental they burned imprints into the structure of time itself. Nora was starting to think they might be onto something. She walked along the river, and every step forward carried her not just across space, but across possibility. The sun-dipped flower. A merchant offered her a fig. She took it. The taste was sharp, fresh, oddly electric. And then, without warning, the scene glitched. Just slightly, a palm tree wavered. The ground seemed to fold for a half second. The sky flickered to night and back again. Someone was still trying to access the spiral. Nora looked down.
The orb in her palm was vibrating now softly, like a heartbeat. Balance was not a final state dot, it was maintenance. Behind her, the temple of Seti shimmered and split just for a blink, as though another version of it tried to assert itself. Historians still argue whether the layout of certain temples followed solar lines, stellar alignments, or hidden symbolic geometry. But one theory, buried deep in 20th century fringe literature, suggested that temples were nodes.
Access points to a larger structure, a grid, not unlike the internet, only cosmic in scale. The spiral was the server, and someone else had the password. She ran back through the palm grove,
past the sleeping ibis,
toward the oldest temple ruin she'd seen earlier, the one without inscriptions.
Now it pulsed.
The stone glowed with the same deep light she'd seen in the engine chamber when she reached the center. She dropped the orb into a basin. A ring of light exploded outward, but this time, no mirror opened. Instead, a figure stepped forward, a woman older than Nora, wearing desert traveler's robes, dust-caked and sunburnt, and yet she carried the same markings across.
Her hands the spiral, the lines of code.
But hers were blue, not gold. You are not the first, the woman said, and you won't be the last. Who are you? I was called Nefru, she said, but the spiral doesn't care about names. It cares about patterns. A deep chill ran through Nora. How long have you been
doing this?
The woman smiled, sadly, since the reign of Sneferu.
Before pyramids had points, mainstream history recognizes Sneferu as the founder of the 4th dynasty and the builder of the bent pyramid. But what if the pyramid's strange shape wasn't due to structural error, but rather recalibration?
So what now? Nora asked. You keep the pattern clean, Nefru said. You monitor the ripples. You'll feel them. Can I stop? No, she said. But you'll learn to rest between waves. The woman faded. Not dramatically. Just
stepped out of phase. Nora stood alone again, the all calling in the
basin. But this time, she wasn't afraid. She wasn't even tired. She simply understood. The pharaohs hadn't ruled Egypt. They'd stabilized it. They weren't gods.
They were janitors of time, and now she was one of them.
The river moves more slowly now. Its current still churns, still nourishes. But there's a lethargy in its pulse, as though the Nile itself is tired. Maybe it's reflecting her.
Or maybe, for the first time, she's hearing it truly speak.
Not in words, of course. In patterns. In rhythm. In memory. Nora sits on the worn stone edge of a half-buried dock, watching 2 children chase a hoop made of twisted reed.
Their laughter echoes, but faintly like a sound remembered more than heard. The spiral is quiet for now. No vibrations from the orb.
No shimmers in the sand.
But she knows better than to believe the stillness. She understands it now. This quiet is not peace.
It is the breath between acts. As she waits, a scribe passes behind her, muttering to himself.
He's repeating a list of names: pharaohs, dynasties, gods with heads of birds and bodies of kings.
The ink-stained fingers twitch as though he's rewriting history on the fly. Maybe he is.
Here, nothing is stable for long. Mainstream historians note that the Egyptian king list, like the one at Abydos, omits several rulers, classes over entire periods.
They usually chalk it up to politics or damnatio memoriae.
But Nora suspects
the truth is more complicated. Some names, maybe, were never meant to exist.
Or worse, existed too much, bent reality too far, and had to be unspooled like loose thread. She thinks of Akhenaten, the heretic king, the monotheist before monotheism, the ruler whose images were shattered and erased.
Historians still argue whether he was mad, visionary, or just politically naive.
But to Nora, he might have been something else entirely, someone who touched the spiral without understanding it, who forced a version of time that couldn't
hold. That's the thing about reality. You can stretch it.
You can bend it, but you can't force it unless you're willing to bear the consequences. She's learning to read the signs, the tremors in the sand, the shimmer in a priest's chant, the unnatural alignment of 3 obelisks in a row.
It's a language of distortion, and once you speak it, you never stop listening. It's late now. Torches flicker on walls carved with gods and stars. The temple courtyards are emptying.
A festival is ending. She never caught the name of it, but the scent of roasted fish and fermented honey lingers in the air.
It smells like something half remembered from a dream. She hears footsteps behind her, not hurried, measured, intentional. She
doesn't turn. She already knows who it is. He sits beside her, young Seti, not yet pharaoh, still human, still uncertain. You knew I'd be here, she says. I didn't know, he replies. I hoped. There's silence between them. The only sound is the lap of the river and the distant call of a night bird. Does it ever stop feeling like you're split in half? She asks. He exhales through his nose. No, but eventually, the halves talk to each other. She smiles.
Not because it helps, just because it's the only thing left to do. You still have time, he says. More than most. She looks at him, then really looks. His eyes are old.
Older than they should be.
But that's the price, isn't it? To carry the weight of reality means you age in places no one can see. I think I miss forgetting, she says. He nods.
But forgetting is how we got broken timelines. A pause, then she laughs quiet and startled. I finally understand why some pharaohs built false tombs.
Diversions.
Dead ends. They weren't hiding from tomb robbers.
They were hiding from the spiral. He grins. Took me years to figure that out. Another scribe passes.
This one scroll is blank. The children have vanished.
Only their footprints remain in there.
Fast. She reaches into her satchel and pours the all free. It no longer glows, but it hums faintly with warmth like a heart learning to sleep between beats. The longer she holds it, the more the world around her feels.
Stitched, woven, tighter. And that's good. It means she's still stabilizing. The path ahead isn't marked.
There's no map.
Just instincts, patterns. and the occasional cryptic message scratched into an ancient wall by someone who may or may not have been herself in another loop. It's exhausting, but it's also somehow beautiful. Seti stands and offers her his hand. She takes it. Together, they walk away from the Nile, the orb tucked in her sash like a fruit not yet ripened. They pass a statue, its face half eroded. The name is gone, erased on purpose, forgotten deliberately, but the spiral remembers, and so does she. They reach the edge of the necropolis. Tomb entrances yawn open like mouths waiting to speak. Somewhere down there, the next ripple has already started. A name scratched wrong, a date twisted, a dream shared by too many people at once. Time is fraying. Again, and it's her turn to sew it shut. The stars are coming out now, slow and careful, one by one, like old gods returning from a long nap. Above the temple, a cool breeze stirs the dust and sends a whisper through the reeds. It carries no message.
Or maybe it carries every message at once spoken in the ancient hush of a world
trying to hold itself together. Nora stands alone again. The orb is quiet. The world, for now, is still. She breathes in long and deep. The night air smells of limestone and old parchment, and something else, to a sweetness, like flowers left as offerings on an unseen altar. This moment, this flicker in the dark, is hers. The footsteps have faded. The torches are out. The temple walls so full of noise, of memory, of time are
calm again. Just stone now. Just silence. She closes her eyes, and in that pause, in that long, gentle pause between chaos and continuity, she feels the river's pulse beneath the earth.
Ancient, slow, patient. She knows it will call again. But not yet. Not tonight. Tonight is for rest. And while the spiral turns always, endlessly, its keeper gets a moment to breathe. To forget. To simply exist. So she exhales and fades softly into the hum of history.